Degenerative illiteracy. Some time ago, I was talking to an old acquaintance on the phone to catch up on each other's lives. When I told him I had published a book on the philosophy of happiness, he asked, "What does it say?" When I described what it was about, he interjected, "No, I mean what is in it." I told him about a summary on the first page of my website that he could read in a few minutes. He did not like that proposition because he asked me instead what the summary says. I did not and still do not have any problems describing my book or its ideas. But this conversation brought a phenomenon home that I had substantially underestimated when I published my book: people generally don't want to read. One might think that such an assessment is extreme, and certainly there are groups of dedicated readers of any genre and form of published writing. But, as dwindling book sales document, they are a retreating minority among the general populace. And even those sales numbers are not true reflections of reading activities. In some circles, it would be embarrassing to admit that one is not reading, or advantageous to pretend that one is reading. Many buy books as status symbols or interior design accessories without reading them. Others skim through them or glean aspects of content from other sources to fake their way through superficial discussions. Many more may be honest and confess little interest in reading books, especially if they do not view themselves under an expectation to do so. But a large contingent of the populace has excuses. Being too busy is one of them. Only, this can be a poor justification for not reading if other diversions and hobbies are pursued instead. Many will say that they read all day in their profession and want to rest their eyes and do something else in their free time. Understandable as that may be, reading in one's profession does not usually involve reading materials that interest or benefit us on a truly personal level. The professional reading most of us undertake pursues someone else's interests where we can make a living. Our ubiquitous private exchanges of emails and text messages, social media, as well as private internet surfing fall into a different category. Arguably, the reading involved in those activities does correspond with our interests. However, these are usually short bits of information that only touch us and our concerns on the surface. Many of them are similarly utilitarian professional writings, with the only difference that they are for our personal purposes. The rest are mostly mundane social notifications and arrangements, or entertainment without deeper personal correlation. None of these categories involving reading count toward the type of reading about which I am concerned. That type goes beyond professional and social management. It also transcends acquiring the technical aspects of knowledge that are so prevalent in basic and advanced education for professional purposes. It further excludes mere diversionary communications for entertainment purposes. My concern is reading of a quality that makes us reflect on our life, our existence, our perceptions, thoughts, emotions, and actions, our relationship with other humans and humanity, as well as our non-human environment. Such reading addresses the defining and pursuing of purposes to which we put technical knowledge, social contacts, and other experiences. This type of acquiring and digesting information can give us direction, can serve to advance us individually, and as a species. I am referring to reading as a stand-in for verbal communication of a similar depth. After all, written language is an outgrowth of spoken language. Still, deeper considerations are much more frequently communicated in writing than in audio recordings or live recitations. The formulation of deeper personal concepts greatly benefits from a person sitting down to put them into written words, because they often are not easily defined or explained to the satisfaction of the person formulating them or recipients. Only a part of such work might be assimilated or incentivized by reading or verbal communication. Many other influences are important for the formation of concepts about our existence. But profound verbal communication gives us an opportunity to intensify our mental presence and broaden our horizon, to take in suggestions and arguments, and to develop critical thinking as we reflect on what we read or hear about our essential existential concerns. While personal contact can accomplish that, and may be crucial for it, written language opens a world of other, often great minds to ours. Great literature uniquely enables us to partake in shared wisdom, compare experiences and emotions to ours, identify premises, trace logic, and consider conclusions and actions at our selection and speed. Reflective reading opens the possibility of consultations between our mind and a myriad of other minds, writers and other readers, to which we otherwise would not have access. Having these experiences requires effort, time, and focus. Such conditions seem to be increasingly lacking. An argument can be made that meaningful reading of this kind has never been particularly popular and that it has mostly been reserved to classes that could afford the leisure, means, and education necessary to engage in reflections of purpose. However, that would only be partly correct. Particularly throughout the past several hundreds of years, one can find significant and growing undertakings to acquire knowledge about purpose by non-privileged classes and individuals. Social movements may primarily come to mind in this regard. But even religious studies by wide ranges of non-clergy contributed. Whatever one may think of the substance offered in such undertakings, their participants were engaging in them to find or confirm purpose and learn about its practice. The weakening of such movements has dramatically reduced deeper reading. Even more instantly utilitarian reading is on the decline. The trend for business as well as private use of media is to shorten written content, and have it supplemented or replaced by audiovisual content. This may be judged positively because the rich potential of oral and visual signals can speed up and augment information transfers, thus allowing an increase in productivity. Moreover, streamlining of data processes and our replacement by machines in their processing can free us from tedious verbal tasks. But we sacrifice our freed time largely to the enabling technology. We either work more or use its implements for private interaction with it. In addition, we use it to play interactive audiovisual games and passively listen to or watch huge amounts of audiovisual media across a variety of devices. We do all that because it can be easier for us to absorb information when it is in this more direct sensory format. Unlike words, audiovisual presentations do not require translation into visual or oral equivalents in our mind. They are received as signals and impressions for whose direct mental processing humans and their predecessors have long been equipped. In many contexts, audiovisual media can also offer a superior way to transport information that cannot adequately, or cannot as succinctly be expressed in words. So audiovisual presentations can significantly enhance our experiences, even in areas needed for deeper existential considerations. But there are also enormously detrimental aspects to their misuse or overuse. The most fundamental observation in this respect is their limited efficacy. Much that can be communicated verbally cannot be satisfactorily communicated by transforming it into audiovisual experiences beyond the audiovisual aspects of verbal communication. Many verbal constructs cannot be depicted at all or well enough by direct sensory representations. This is because they may be memories of persons, things, and events that are better transmitted by referring to pre-existing similar experiences in recipients. Beyond that, words are often partial abstractions of experiences that would be confused by audiovisual commingling. The understanding of such abstractions by recipients requires that they can refer to their own experiences and abstractions. Audiovisual representations may help us augment our experiences and draw abstractions from them on both sides of a communication. But in the end, verbal communication between individuals as well as the arrangement of complex thoughts within a person's mind does not move in audiovisual ways but in abstractions from them and other sensory experiences. That these abstractions are referenced to experiences in our mind and may ultimately be conglomerated into mental and actual scenarios does not render the requirement of abstraction less important. Abstraction is necessary to allow an understanding between individuals who do not have the same experiences and are not able to demonstrate their thoughts by acting them out or having them play out in another form. Even where common experiences are missing, they may be able to imagine new experiential elements or allocations of experiential elements through abstracted descriptive language. Abstraction also enables higher levels of consideration. Some concepts may be abstracted so as not to have experiences as immediate references. They may constitute abstractions from abstractions as well as interactions between abstractions on several levels or between abstractions and factual references. Speech and its representation as writing were invented because visual representations of persons, things and events were too cumbersome in communicating many concepts commensurate with higher development of humans. Much of this may have been remedied through communications technology. Demonstrative guidance may be possible, and very helpful to communicate how conditions can be kept or changed. However, a vast advantage of verbal abstraction remains beyond the realm of technical descriptions. By shunning or diminishing verbal expression, we risk limiting our minds to the limited content that can be represented by other audiovisual means. If we receive our information about the world in audiovisual formats that do not take advantage of abstracted concepts, our minds are occupied by immediate levels of information presentation and processing. Immediate audiovisual signals are particularly impressive because they emulate how we have naturally absorbed information from our environment since long before language and writing were invented. Even when these impressions are canned or artificial, their apparent immediacy impresses and forms us on a visceral level. They can bypass our reflective intellect and subsequently influence it by instinctive attitudes they activate or form. Even if we involve higher levels of our mind, the immediacy of impressions gives audiovisual deliveries an air of truth. This continues when we are subjected to transmitted audiovisual representations. They simulate to us situations we attend and to which we are eyewitnesses. We instinctively tend to believe more what we seem to hear with our own ears and to see with our own eyes. This subconscious verification reaction may include experiences that are clearly marked as fiction in our conscious mind. It may also extend to explanatory, interpretative, or supplementary commentary that is paired with factual information, telling us what we are to take away from an audiovisual encounter. Our credulity tends to include such commentary because its weaving into more immediate experiences makes it difficult to distinguish from the rest of our sensory experience. Moreover, the bombardment with signals whose timing we do not control forces information into our minds without the opportunity of pacing our mental digestion. This may disable our analytical and reflective processes, occupying our minds with registering the items in the information torrent, and having no other choice than to take them at face value. This may sound as if we were involuntarily subjected to audiovisual media. However, they are generally invited. Many of us may welcome audiovisual immersion because the passivity and breadth of exposure from which we can select suggest an easy way to receive information for various purposes. We tend to appreciate being fed packaged information that requires a minimal effort on our part and replaces it with the efforts of others to prepare and present desired content. These suggestive and welcome aspects of audiovisual information make it a perfect tool for content producers to direct and program our minds. They can build on the susceptibility, trust, and appreciation of convenience we already extend to audiovisual signals by making them more gratifying. Media content may be geared to speak to our emotional and instinctive exposures. It may also be produced to make us believe that information we receive carries objectively reflective or rational gravity. By investing issuers or conveyors of information with an air of trustworthiness and authority, audiences can be made to believe that others have already done the necessary exploratory, and even selective and reflective work. They can be made to rely on and identify with presented conclusions, reactions, and recommendations that are purportedly derived on their behalf. Troublesome as such influences may be, they are not the main topic of this article and are being discussed in my work on other occasions. Our focus here is on what immersion into a transmitted audiovisual feed does to our capacity to form complex concepts in our mind, particularly regarding our existence. Manipulative influences finding their way into our mind through audiovisual feeds may have significant consequences on our willingness and ability to form or consider such concepts. But they only take advantage of and deepen impairments caused by the replacement of verbal information with audiovisual information that would also exist without them. Leaving manipulative influences aside, our subjection to audiovisual transmissions reinforces our receptiveness for their delivery method. Without much coaxing except for the offering of more, and more involving, audiovisual products, this information funneling often gives rise to an addiction. By our selections, we can build impressions of a world to our liking. Such a virtual reality can become more dominating in our perceptions, thinking, feeling, and actions than any reality we secure ourselves by direct impressions. This is not only due to the inherent power of audiovisual media, but also because their content can be geared to be of more interest to us than personal, unfiltered audiovisual experiences. They can entice us to live in a better virtual world and neglect our comparatively inferior personal affairs and the circumstances that reflect on them. The rise of audiovisual processes in our utilitarian concerns may impart an attitude of normalcy and even necessity to the continuation of such processes in areas beyond. Great upheavals in our actual personal affairs might bring us back to a comparatively somber level of reality. So we and forces interested to guide us for their purposes may share an interest, to keep our personal life regulated in a framework of uneventful routine. Here again, external influences may easily take advantage of our attitudes and conduct. But even if we discount the threats of dependency and loss of a sense of reality, there remains a more fundamental danger in the way audiovisual immersion degenerates the structures and processes of our mind. This development and its consequences on our quality of existence are often not appreciated. The purportedly fuller representation of information in an audiovisual feed may appear superior to mere verbal expressions. We may not realize that the abstraction of concepts that is embodied in words frees our thinking to propel itself to unprecedented heights. It represents an inventory of analyzed reality that we can assemble in our mind to constructs we wish to build. Impressions of an audiovisual entirety have to be analyzed by this verbal tool set to fully open them to our understanding and fully empower us in our interactions with them and their underlying reality. Unanalyzed streams of audiovisual experiences circumvent this capability. Being continually fed bits of immediate pictures and sounds, our mind is becoming less trained in references and abstractions that would allow deeper reflection and integrated consideration. For one, this is a function of receiving less verbal input that already represents analyzed reality. This input would force us to refer to parts of our mind in which abstractions relate back to experiences and related abstracted concepts. It would also force us to derive abstractions. Secondly, our lack in mental training is a function of audiovisual flooding that prevents our mind from constructing abstractions and concepts through proper analysis of audiovisual information. As our minds become inundated with audiovisual transmissions that emulate personal, non-abstracted experiences, the issue soon becomes not only that we prefer them to verbal acquisition of information. Their replacement of verbal communication also causes changes in our mind that decrease our ability to process verbal information. Over long, we may lose the procedural and substantive mental skill set to absorb and apply words in an effective or efficient manner. We become degeneratively illiterate, which threatens to dramatically reflect on how we cope and succeed in our existence. This type of illiteracy is not always obvious. It does not mean that we could not read to a required functional level. Nor would we have the impression we are not processing verbal communications. The torrent of words accompanying broader audiovisual representations in gainful and private aspects of our life may suggest to us quite the contrary. We may function within the demands of such verbiage. Being degeneratively illiterate means that we are losing the ability to apprehend and properly address issues of deeper consequence that require our attention and deliberation. In my experience, this phenomenon is already rampant and affects individuals from all walks of life. not all degenerative illiteracy can be attributed to the advance of audiovisual media at the cost of verbal communication. As one reviews individuals with increasingly higher levels of education, another cause becomes progressively prevalent. It can be described as an attitude of complacency after having arrived and mastered the verbal communication tools of the trade and position and having reached fluency in applying them. Individuals with academic or other advanced education are often startlingly affected by and ignorant of this syndrome, which can encompass several parts. They may identify so much with their profession that they become unable to identify areas in their life in which they do not possess the high learning and skill levels of their profession. They may be convinced the proof of their mental capacity and their expertise acquired and exercised by professional achievements reflect on their intelligence and astuteness in other, including personal areas of their life. They may also believe that they do not require much further advancement in their professional knowledge and skills after they are established. Even university professors, particularly in the humanities, whose business it is to conceive of deeper questions of human existence, seem frequently to have all but abandoned the idea of broadening their horizon after having done enough to attain and defend their academic status. Instead, they seem to prefer to stay within or close to familiar grooves of thought and content with only minor variations penned by themselves or colleagues. In their world, such self-restriction even draws compliments and distinguishes them as specialists in their field. Obviously, not every profession and underlying science is afflicted by such a lull, and verbal communication is still widely used in the management and technological advancement of humanity. Yet even this area of literacy is decreasing and becoming more and more insular and distanced from a vast sea of population that is much less versed in using advanced constructs of language for technical purposes. The decline in considerations of purpose is even more pervasive because it can and is likely to include those proficient in technical applications of words. Acuity in technical abstractions may not translate well into the realm of different concepts they would have to address in other aspects of their life. The increasingly specialized knowledge and application of words and thought processes by such individuals may not prepare them for the derivation and consideration of personal concepts relating to purpose, which require comprehensive integration to be effective. Moreover, their purportedly high mental function in their profession may be much less capable than perceived. After a sufficient learning curve, they may be mostly applying the same mental functions again and again with little variety or limited new adaptation. The question then becomes what fills the voids of personal considerations after applications of inapplicable professional skill sets fail. Individuals with high functional literacy may deem themselves less vulnerable to externally sourced audiovisual influences. However, their failure to recognize their lack of skill or their voids of consideration in personal affairs, and their inability to leverage specialized skill sets, make them not only prone to errors but also receptive to such influences. Possibly, these influences may have to increase in sophistication to be deemed compatible with higher educated minds. Still, such minds are likely to be similarly uneducated in personal affairs as those with lesser professional education and therefore substantively similarly open to audiovisual influence. Ultimately, it would seem that a large majority of individuals from all walks of life are susceptible to targeted and invited media influence. Individuals may feature different characteristics that lead to different and differently strong effects of transmitted media. Still, after audiovisual media take hold and expand, the mental acuity of any individual subjected to them is bound to decline. One reason the problem of degenerative illiteracy might be denied is that the first symptom is not inability but unwillingness. Individuals who could technically and intellectually read a complex book or shorter piece prefer the ease of audiovisual feeds. They may also prefer a life that does not press the acquisition of verbal information beyond certain regulated requirements. This is likely to have consequences in acquired substance and processing capabilities. The result of long-term exposure to such conditions in the usage of one's brain is bound to change it. Even if such degeneration would be limited due to past exposure to a different mind-shaping environment or would be reversible due to that fact, new generations may not have a remedial past to fall back on. They may grow up in an environment dominated by external audiovisual influences that trounce or completely eviscerate complex verbal communications. Once this tradition is lost, it may be impossible to regain. We already can witness the beginnings of such generational changes and imagine in their extrapolation what this means for individuals and humanity. Maybe small elite circles may keep their mental acuity and ensuing superiority alive, left to care for and possibly lead masses with lower ability. Maybe technically proficient elites will take over who have no understanding of larger human context. Maybe humanity will descend into a new chapter of the Dark Ages where written knowledge is preserved by a few institutions dedicated to this task. Maybe humanity resigns its mental dominance to machines with possibly even more devastating consequences for its survival or thriving than cold elite human rule. One might argue that we are at the very beginning of developments that might lead to such unpleasant outcomes. However, the technical, individual, and societal changes driving such developments proceed remarkably fast and may soon be out of our control. In this context, we do not only have to confront the consolidation of technology now available. We have to anticipate that audiovisual experiences will expand to become increasingly richer and complete in their coverage of our senses to where they may become indistinguishable from non-virtual experiences. Our immersion into external media may assume a depth we currently can only faintly imagine. Further, the advancement of media exposure is set to be part of a far more extensive technological revolution gripping human existence. In this context, considerations of purpose may gain in importance far in excess of past urgencies. They may become of existential significance. However, we seem to be losing our will and mental presence to engage in such considerations precisely around the time when we appear to need them most.